Well, randomized clinical trials are great for supporting evidence-based medicine, but good luck finding one that applies exactly to your or your patient's situation. Atropos Health aims to fill that evidence gap with just-in-time prognostograms, providing patient-specific answers using real-world data. Hi, everyone. I'm David Williams, president of strategy consulting firm HealthBiz Group and host of the HealthBiz podcast, a weekly show where I interview top healthcare entrepreneurs about their lives and careers. I'm here today with Brigham Hyde. He's founder and CEO of Atropos Health, who can tell us all about the use of personalized real-world evidence for clinical treatment decisions. If you like this episode, I really hope you'll subscribe and ask your friends to do the same. Well, Brigham, welcome to the HealthBiz podcast.
Thanks for having me, David.
Listen, I guess I screwed up the name of your company the first time, but I'll say like Atropos 10 times fast, and we'll see where it goes from there. But thanks for giving me that.
Only 10 more times, and then we're there. You got to say the yes.
Say the yes. Okay, it's not silent. So great. So let's talk about your company. But first, let's talk about you and your upbringing, background, etc. What was your childhood like, and any early influences that have stuck with you?
Yeah, I grew up in a ski town in Vermont called Stowe, small town. My parents were both educators, and sort of an awesome upbringing. Yes, I did go to high school with Von Traps and, all those things.
Yeah.
But, grew up in New England and, was sort of taught that curiosity element that I think drives people into the sciences. I'd say the biggest thing formative to my career, sadly, I lost my mother to cancer when I was 14. And I think I've been sort of chasing that ever since through many different twists and turns, but definitely has driven me into the field that I'm in.
Makes sense. Now, in Stowe, I've been there. It's a good spot. You go up that hill. They've got some good cross-country skiing up in the Von Trapp area. It's a whole conglomeration now. But when you say educators in Stowe, does that mean ski instructors?
Well, actually, they met on the ski patrol. Okay.
Nice.
And then my mom ended up teaching second and third grade, and my dad was a special educator dealing with special needs kids. So a high bar for homework at home, I guess, was the lesson.
No kidding. All right. Well, good. So from an educational standpoint, after going to high school, I know where that high school is there along there. If you were at Stowe High School, it's right along the way. And take a left for the Von Trapps and right toward the town.
Exactly.
So Northeastern and Tufts. After that, what was that all about?
Yeah, I was excited to get to Boston. Stowe's a pretty small place, so Boston felt like a big city. And Northeastern was super attractive, great sort of technical education. I was a chemistry major and a business minor, but they had the co-op program, which allowed you to go out and work while you were in school. And I got to do some great internships, including Wolf Laboratories, which is a CRO in the Boston area. Janet Wolf, amazing entrepreneur in and of herself. And sort of I got the bug for life sciences and pharma and entrepreneurship through her.
I was going to say my son is actually just starting at Northeastern this semester. So he's actually in Ireland to start with, out of Boston, but we're looking forward to having him come back. And certainly that program that you're talking about is very attractive to him and to us.
Yeah, no, it was terrific. And it led me to the decision because of that internship that I wanted to get a PhD. I needed to know more about the science, get into that. In the arc of losing a parent to cancer, I was thinking, okay, chemist, let me make the cure. Then I was thinking, well, let's help develop the cure through clinical research. And so I went to Tufts right away out of undergrad, got my PhD in clinical pharmacology. Most folks with that degree go on to work with the FDA or at pharmaceutical companies. I was there in Boston during the genomic revolution, if you will. Eric Lander, Francis Collins had just finished the human genome, and it was a super exciting time to think about that. And that began to drive me towards the data world at the time, and started a company, my first company actually in grad school, called Relay Technology Management. Won a business plan competition or two, had a co-founder, and began to sort of build that business out even before we graduated.
No, pretty cool. And then what'd you do after that?
Well, I finished before my co-founder. Actually, Dave Greenwald is actually an investor at Deerfield Capital now. We're still close.
Nice.
But I said I needed to know something about business now, so I decided going to Wall Street was going to be the way to do that. So I actually went into the investment banking world, worked for Cowen and Company. I was an analyst on the sell side and covered genomics and CROs. really exciting to learn about those businesses and understand the public markets a bit more. Wasn't for me long term. I sort of missed the business building part as opposed to the analyzing part. And the company we started, Relay, got funded by Nature Publishing Group, and I jumped out of the seat on Wall Street back into the entrepreneur chair.
No, it sounds good. I was trying to connect these things. So you did Wolf before. You weren't the Wolf of Wall Street. Those were two separate experiences.
No. Although I know plenty of those from those days.
Exactly. No, it's for this show. It's good to say Wall Street wasn't for me, meaning certain things were not for you. So we won't have to get into that here. I won't be censored.
Yes.
So that's good. You spent a time at as you started to wander into the evidence-based and real-world evidence side. As he's a stint at Decision Resources and Precision Health. Concerto.
Yeah, at this time, and this is sort of mid 2010s. We'd had the Meaningful Use acts passed in Congress that were driving EMR records to be collected. We were starting to have genomics data at scale. And my first company, Relay, had really started to work with that data at the time to help identify drug targets and what is now called AI drug discovery. We didn't call it that back then. It was called, sort of information science. But we were acquired by Decision Resources Group in the Boston area, a great sort of healthcare life sciences platform. I became chief data officer there, and they really tasked me with building that sort of first data business for them. And this was at a time when really the only two companies out there were IQVIA and Symphony Health. And we were able to build a claims and analytics practice really around the same time Komodo started. So sort of a different model, PE-backed as opposed to venture. But we all know each other in that space. And it was exciting early days of the data business and using it to inform development and commercialization for pharma, but also help providers and payers identify opportunities for care improvement. But it was so long ago, I remember getting shipped a hard drive of data in the mail that I then had to lock in a closet because that was the best security we had for HIPAA at the time. So I've been doing it a while. That's
pretty good. Now, the thing is, it's good as all you guys, you look a little different because you don't have the ponytail. Maybe you had that one. That goes with Komodo, but
that's right.
There's no equivalent over at Atropos, apparently.
Not yet. It is a little long right now, but not that.
It looks like you could do it, get that man bun going or something. But I'll be jealous of you if you do that.
Absolutely.
Okay. So Precision Health AI, Concerto, how did that?
Yeah, let me explain the logo hijinks there. So I did a good run at DRG, about 3-4 years there. Ramesh Wadhwani, who had been a great sort of investor in Silicon Valley for many years, was starting a new fund, which was called Symphony AI. And I'd been doing research work at MIT during this period, particularly with Sandy Pentland, working on network analyses, graph database, things like that. I was super into the space. And he recruited me to be the healthcare partner in that fund sort of day one with the hope of investing in, healthcare AI businesses, but we were also investing cross industry. Sort of day two of being there, we found ourselves in a position to pursue a partnership with ASCO CancerLink, which following Flatiron Health was the largest oncology data asset at the time. And they were beginning to look for partners in industry. So Ramesh asked me to set up a business, in New York and begin hiring a team, and also went on to acquire a number of businesses, originally called Precision Health. Later, the conglomerate of them became Concert. We won that ASCO partnership and launched the business right after basically Flatiron sold to Roche, which was a great time for us.
Yeah.
And did a great partnership with Tempus there to help get that done. And, launched what's become just an amazing business in Concert, drove it to huge growth over those periods, and really have, bringing that RWD regulatory grade aspect to really what's beginning to shape pharma in a significant way.
I think we met up around that time. I remember I think we had lunch at Grand Central, some restaurant there. Remember that? Yeah. So that was about that time you were talking about that, and you made it happen. So I thought you were bullshitting, but it turned out it was good.
The thing that works well in healthcare is whenever there's a regulatory shift. In 21st Century Cures Act has had such an impact, on the use of data in healthcare and for innovation in pharma. It's cool. It's one of those rare kind of like in a political sense. Both sides can get behind it. The right sees it as a way to advance cures and speed innovation. And, for the left, it's a great way to help with inclusion, right? So instead of a clinical trial that, let's be honest, oftentimes are run on white 35-year-olds or Memorial Sloan Kettering, we can make it more diverse. We can get better representation. And Concert's gone on to launch their E-Race initiative as well to sort of drive diversity into trials. So it's an awesome story, I think, for everybody involved, and a big home run there as well.
That's good. So then I think Eversana, and as I recall, we went from lunch to dinner, because I remember having a dinner with you and Jim Lang at, I think it was out in San Francisco, JP Morgan maybe at that time. So what was that all about besides the good eatings?
Yeah, and Jim and I have known each other 15 years back in Boston. He was the CEO at DRG who acquired my first company. I'd see what he was doing with Eversana along with their investors, Water Street and JLL, and different strategy. They're doing a sort of roll-up of companies, but the purpose behind the roll-up was, if you look at life sciences companies, pharma companies, they typically outsource a lot of R&D, they outsource a lot of manufacturing, but they recently hadn't outsourced much commercial. And so creating a real big service company, service-oriented, that could do all the things in commercial was the goal. The added piece, which was super cool, was, if you look around biotech, and this is, by the way, more true today than it was a couple of years ago, if you're a biotech company, you develop this asset, you've got it to FDA approval, you've done all the clinical trials. Now you have to figure out how we're going to sell the thing. And, their options, for those companies are typically a little tough. Option A is I could sell it to Pfizer or a big pharma. Maybe I get 25 cents on the dollar or some royalties, but, they take control of it. Option two, and this is if you're a public company, but also true if you're private, I have to raise a whole bunch of money from investors, dilute my stock, and take all the risk in building a commercial enterprise, which isn't what you've ever been. You've always been R&D, so now I have to build it myself. And so Eversana became option three, which was pretty cool. So what we would do is, instead of those two options, come to us. We will defer some costs. We'll share some risk and upside, and we'll do everything. So you don't have to deal with managing 20 vendors. You don't have to hire everybody. We'll hire the CCO. And for a data guy, we use data and analytics to make it really sort of light of foot in terms of cost. And that allows them to save on cost of capital. It allows them to save on execution risk. It became really an awesome model that's emerged over the last several years. In fact, last year, Eversana launched 14 new drugs, which was more than all but 2 of the top 10 large pharma. So it's almost this new commercialization mode that they're driving in the market and having great success with.
That's great. I love that third option. It's often the best one if you can do that. Okay, so Atropos Health. So what's the concept behind this company, and how did it get started? Because it sounds like everything else you're doing is so wonderful. Why something new?
Yeah, I mean, look, as somebody who's been in this space a long time, has built great businesses where a core of the business is let's go find some data, acquire it, clean it up, and then create value with it, usually by driving research and working with pharma. That's exciting and innovative and has been very successful. But if you go back to, losing my mother to cancer at 14, I'm trying to impact patients. That's what we're all here for. And what's amazing about Atropos is that it actually brings that power of real world evidence right to the point of care, right to that individual patient and physician. And the story behind it is that Nigam Shah, who's a great acolyte in our space, he's at Stanford. He's actually the chief data scientist at Stanford Healthcare now. But he had been a professor of bioinformatics there, and I've known him now 7-8 years, and he started this thing internally at Stanford where, being the head of bioinformatics, he had control of the EMR data. So all his doctor friends would send him questions that he had to answer. And he's like, screw this. He's like, I need to build some technology and a service to serve all these people. And that became the Green Button Initiative. And the core of it is technology that enables a study to be done really fast. Just to give you a comparison, at Concert, for me to do the type of study we do at Atropos would normally take me, at best case, a month, usually several months, and require many people involved to do it well. And he built technology that allows that to happen in a day or two now, which that speed impact means that the point of care option is now available. And it means we could actually intake that. They also built a consult service. So it's meant to feel the doctors like, hey, I'm consulting my colleague down the hall in cardiology. I'm just asking informatics, hey, what does the data say about a patient like this in front of me? And I watched that for several years, was in love with it, kept telling Nick how much I loved it. And right between concert and Eversana, he called me up. He said, hey, we want to spin it out. And I helped him do that. I invested some seed capital and sat on the board while I was at Eversana as we sort of launched the company. But they got really exciting traction over the last year and a half. Some of it's announced, some of it will be announced shortly. But really looked at it and said, hey, what do I want to spend my time doing over these next few years? Super passionate about this and the impact it can have. I was thinking it'll be a great big business. You know, the more we see the demand for this coming from the physicians. It's almost like we had one doctor call us and he says, why are you helping me? Was his question. And he's like, this is what I've always asked for, but nobody's ever been able to provide it. So, you know, it's an inspiring company to work for that way and, you know, exciting to help drive the business. We also just raised a Series A, great investors, Briar Capital and Emerson Collective. And we're really excited to drive this around the world, actually, looking at it internationally as well.
So, you know, you talk a lot about the so-called evidence gap. What is an evidence gap? What's an example of an evidence gap?
Sure. So if you look at clinical trials, as we said, I mean, you know, they are the gold standard, but let's just be honest, most of the time patients would be excluded from it. And there's a study we cite often that, you know, 79% of people with 1 to 2 chronic or 2 or more chronic comorbidities would be excluded from trials. And yet those very same people receive 80% of the care. So most of the patients would be excluded from most of the trials. Like, it just doesn't make sense. And you add to that, you know, rare disease, rare demographic populations, women, children, elderly, different groups in health equity. I mean, they are almost systematically left out of this evidence generation, yet they're the ones receiving care. So the result of this is doctors have to extrapolate every single day. You know, they sort of say, well, I think this looks right, or, you know, they look for the closest they can. And, you know, that gap is the evidence gap we're to solve. And we think the way to solve it is by enabling that rapid question asking, you know, right before any care, personalize that patient. We get questions where the patient's history, their background, their genomics, their previous treatments, all that factors into the question asked. It's not a generic any question or any patient question that gets asked. So we're super excited about that impact.
So, you know, one way to address, just to play devil's advocate for a minute, one way to address the issue with clinical trials would be to say, hey, let's actually have more of a match between the people that are in trials and the people that are getting treatment. And I think you see that like from a Medicare standpoint and say, we're paying for people, you know, that are not being studied. So what about instead of having the company that you're doing, you know, sort of reforming the way trials are done? Would that be an alternative approach?
Yeah, you know, folks like Amy Abernathy at Verily, I think the goal is to put everybody in a clinical trial all the time. By the way, sounds great. You know, like I'm all for that. You know, I think practically speaking, that's not happening tomorrow, right? And you know, I'm super passionate about, you know, data points from the digital space and what it could mean to be in a totally decentralized trial. But that's just not the reality today. And even if that was, you know, our solution would be a great fit. You still need to be able to ask questions of that data once you collect it. And whether you're analyzing clinical trial data or EMR data or something else, you know, right now the technology is out there, very slow to process that information. Now, it's great if you want to produce a research study once every 6 months, but it's not going to meet that need at the point of care. And, you know, we're betting a bit on this exact ecosystem. I believe data is more available now than ever. I think there'll be more data, more types. And what we want to be is the app layer on top of that. You know, instead of having a company just because I have a data set, let's have a company that sits on all the data, drives more transactions and questions, and gets them to the people who need them. Because I think that's the opportunity that's coming from this infrastructure.
Now, on this evidence gap, so I think I understand the general sort of almost policy issue there. Can you just give maybe an example of like what would be a physician? You talked about somebody saying, I've been asking for this all the time. You know, why are you helping me? What would be an example of a patient coming in where the evidence just from the trials just doesn't make sense, but you would be able to generate it from the sort of real world data?
I mean, the great part of this company is if you're having a bad day, just go read the requests we got that morning.
Yeah. Okay.
Super inspiring. But I'll give you a couple that I think hit the point you're asking. So we had a question, doctor had a patient who had melanoma. They wanted to give them Keytruda in this case, or another IO. And unfortunately, the patient also had diabetes and was on metformin. Yet, lo and behold, the studies on those drugs excluded diabetics on metformin. I mean, who knew diabetics got cancer? But, they do. And the concern was that potentially there would be a renal issue, right? So metformin has some renal background, as does diabetes. The IOs are a little understudied. So he wanted to make sure that giving that drug to this patient wouldn't cause a problem. And so we took the question, asked it of thousands of patients who looked just like that. And interestingly enough, this is sort of in the statistical weeds, when we did a basic analysis, the p-value said, actually, yeah, it looks like there is an issue there. But we also do higher order statistics. By the way, all of our methods very transparently published. Everybody can read them. We just try and do it the best way possible. We use something called high dimensional propensity matching, which removes all the biases of the two groups. So you just want to make sure you're comparing apples to apples. So you don't want the 35-year-old triathlete being compared to the 65-year-old smoker. It's basic approach. But when we did that, it said that no, there is not a signal here. It's okay that the two drugs can be given together. It won't cause renal disease. And we deliver this back as a consult, right? So we have a doctor on our side who actually walks them through the results, explain to them, what that meant. And in this case, the doctor's decision was, okay, I'll give it, but I'm going to increase renal monitoring. So I'm just going to make sure we don't have an issue. Patient got the treatment, went on to do great, right? So those types of questions come up all the time. I think an interesting point there is if we need to approve Keytruda as a drug for melanoma, I want my family, I want the clinical trial. Do the randomized, double-blind, do it for line one evidence. But I think what we're realizing is the minute that drug gets approved, now there's all these other questions, right? Like, can I give it with this? What about this background? What about patients who are excluded? And that's really where we fill in, is sort of all that care management that goes on around this stuff.
Now, you have a solution, you call it a prognostogram. That's easier. It's like it's a weirder word, but it's easier to pronounce. So what is a prognostogram and how does it work?
So it's our proprietary report. Right now it's a PDF, although there's a digital version on the way. And it's the report that comes back with the answer. Up top, it has a simple explanation of the question we got, usually just a couple sentences of text. Result description, sort of like you'd see in a publication. And then a summary or conclusion on any key findings. And then it goes on to lay out all the details of the query that was asked, the codes that were used, the logic, all the stats and background between the two arms, whether more comorbid patients in one arm, what about completeness of record, all that. And then it shows the statistics. And this record is what's sent to the doctor and reviewed. It's then appended to the patient record in some cases. And these reports, as we deliver them, I have over 20 odd of them have gone on to be published now. So literally somebody will take the report, they'll write an intro and a conclusion on it, submit it to a journal, and we have 100% peer review success rate with our methods. And interestingly enough, a couple of them now that have been published are now being cited by the very guidelines that are supposed to inform care. So I just think of us as turning that flywheel of evidence generation faster. And that's true whether you're dealing with a patient, whether you're setting a policy, maybe at the formulary level or whatever, or if you're just trying to advance research in the topic. And we're just here to accelerate that whole process.
It's interesting. A lot of companies talk about, like research grade approach or whatever. And it's, I'm not saying it isn't legitimate, but it comes from a marketing first. But with the way you just described it, of things actually being accepted in peer review publications would kind of tell the tale pretty directly.
Yeah, we point at the scoreboard on that. Although I'd say as a person, nobody understands what that term actually means better than me or me and maybe a few dozen others. I mean, what we do on data quality, because this is sort of a related topic, what we do is we rely on partnerships with the relevant data sets. So when I go to a new institution, I say, look, I'll install on your data. By the way, I'm not going to take your data. It doesn't leave your environment. I don't need identified data. It's very low friction. And I'm happy to provide answers on that data. But sometimes your data, no matter how great it is, might not be perfect for the question I got, right? So when we partner with ASCO CancerLink, and again, having partnered with them before in my life, ASCO actually has human curated oncology data. Somebody went through and read the radiology report and documented the tumor size or the stage or what have you. And if I get an oncology question that needs that detail, like I'm asking about stage 1 patients, I'm asking about progression-free survival, most institutions' EMR data can't answer that directly. But with a partnership with ASCO, I can, right? So our approach is sort of this evidence network we're launching, which Basically, all these institutions are on the network. You can decide, do I want to ask a question on my data or somebody else's data? And at the center of that, we're also starting to matchmake and grade that. So think of it as like a credit score for if I'm asking this question, what's the best data set to use to answer it? And we think that's a great way for people to sort of get to the right answer, the right level of evidence. And sometimes you need regulatory grade data. Sometimes publication grade's enough. Sometimes, any data is interesting. So we just want to be transparent about that and help people decide and get to the best data set.
So let's talk about how you turn this into a business. Now, I can see there's a demand side for it, right? I'd want it as a patient. I know this drug hasn't been studied in somebody like me. I'm nervous about taking it, whatever, if I'm an informed patient. The physician obviously wants to have this sort of consultation that they can't get because even if they find like the best specialist, the data may be out there, but this is another way to like consult the data as like its own type of specialist. Then you've got the kind of on the supply side of these different data sets that you're talking about. You have to have people to put it all together. So how does it all work out? And is there somebody that will pay for it in the current system, or does it require some different sort of a payment methodology or something that's outside of the regular system? Like how does it all flow and make it into a successful business?
Yeah, sure. So I'll sort of tell you where we are in that journey. We focused initially on academic medical centers. It's the right combination of factors, physicians who are treating difficult patients, research focus at the institution, also sort of the environment where this type of discussion is common. We're usually including the CMIO, head of informatics, in this to help further their agenda. Department heads who maybe want to have their staff be able to leverage this. And then honestly, folks at the ACO level who, if you have an ACO contract, you're dealing with risk pools, but what keeps you up at night is those rare patients that go on to be really expensive. This is a great way to hedge against that. And that's what's been driving us so far. I think as we extend past that, there's a couple of things that have happened in the last year to us that are sort of driving a really interesting sort of development. First is that CMS launched a couple of new codes about 4 years ago, CPT codes associated with information consults. And we've now been successfully reimbursed on those codes. Both the ordering physician and us can be reimbursed. And it's related to how much time they spend reviewing the information. So back to the human in the loop, the medical director on our side, that's part of the service, right? And that gives a motivation on the revenue side and a payment model for us, whether or not the institution wants to sign a platform subscription. The other sort of interesting thing about that is that we fit nicely into the continuum of e-consults, right? Yeah. It's great to be able to consult the specialist, but a lot of the time, what you need is just some data like we provide, answering your question. And we're a faster solution to that. We're also a less expensive version of it on the staffing side. So we're doing a lot now in kind of the e-consult continuum. I think as this goes out, all the way to the community and the PCP, at your local checkup, I think there's going to be a number of modes, right? Sometimes it'll be through those consult avenues or through sort of the research end. Other times, I think we'll be more involved in transactional healthcare. So something that's arisen for us, you think about the concept of prior auth, right? Yeah. Well, I want to get an expensive drug. It's pretty heavy-handed today, right?
It sure is.
So like, hey, it's expensive. The answer is no, and you got to fight us for 4 weeks. Well, what if we could just say, okay, well, let's run an analysis for this patient. What does the data say? Should we approve this or not? And if we could agree to say yes or no based on the evidence, I think it actually benefits both parties because the doctors get an answer more rapidly. By the way, if the evidence says no, the payer gets a no without a big fight, right? Yeah. And I think that's what they want as well. And so we're starting to move into those kind of transactional models. And I think, as we spread around the world, hopefully, we just want to be there wherever evidence is needed. By the way, value-based care, it's like, how are we even signing value-based contracts that aren't driven by sort of localized evidence? I don't know how we're really doing that. Yeah. So, if we can be the part of support that enables that decision-making, that both sides can agree, hey, if the data says no, the answer is no. If the data says yes, the answer is yes. And so we're pursuing a number of channels on that.
So you talked about this being a business that goes around the world, and you mentioned it a couple of times. Yeah. As part of the Series A, do you expect to kind of extend around the world or into different places? And are there different considerations in, say, one country versus another, one region versus another?
We already have requests coming from around the world. And it's a big focus of our sort of newly assembled board because our thing already works for that, right? Yeah. And You think about different international sort of setups. In some ways, they might be in a better situation in the U.S. market to try these things. They can drive digital adoption much faster. They're lacking evidence on their population in many cases. And we saw this originally show up during COVID, where you had international bodies looking for evidence from the U.S. data of what to do and what to pursue. So, we think it's a great solution for that. I think you'll hear more from us soon on that front. We think we're ready for it now and are partnering on that front today.
Sounds good. So it sounds like you have some announcements in the offing. Anything you want to share in terms of vision or specifics over the next, let's say, 3 years for the company?
No, I think, we feel like we've found this demand that people haven't uncapped yet. And I think it's very simple. This is not a new idea, by the way, David.
Yeah.
Like the learning health system, that idea has been out here for 40 years. It's just now with EMR data where it is, with cloud computing and storage where it is, an application like ours can finally happen. And so I think one of the things that's exciting for us is the demand we're seeing from ordering. So let me just give you a couple stats. On average, if a doctor orders one of these, they go on to order 5 or 6 in the first 6 months. 30% of those users go on to order 8 or more. So I almost have to think of this like a consumer company. And I think in that lens, as you think 3 years out, there's a version of this service that I think could benefit patients. And honestly, I think of it as shared decision-making between patients and doctors. Imagine you went in your doctor's office and, your physician was like, yeah, here's a personalized report for your care with all this evidence. And first of all, you'd be shocked because no way they do that for you today. But, I think we're seeing that. And the upside we're seeing when that happens is that the patient's more convinced that this is the right way to go. And it's funny because the rest of our lives, we're so used to having analytics as part of it. When you buy health insurance, you buy car insurance, it's like tailored for you. When you buy, retail, advertising, you're used to everything being personalized, but healthcare is nowhere near that, right? So I hope to be able to inform a huge percentage of every interaction this way. And those are the big goals for the company.
No, it sounds good. Sounds sufficiently
ambitious.
Bold. Yeah, it does.
Yes.
It does. So final question is about whether you've had a chance to read any good books lately, or even any classics that you would recommend for our viewers and listeners.
So I'm a big biography guy as a rule. So I just read Jim Bakker's biography as a Washington insider. Found it to be incredibly interesting how he moved between Congress and the White House and sort of made things work in a time when we could remember that politicians worked together. So I enjoyed that as a reflection. The other book that has shaped this year for me more than anything, I read last Christmas. Ray Dalio had a new book come out that focused on the history of when sort of the index currency for the world changes and what that means. And let me just say, it was a slightly frightening book to read, but I think has come true a lot. And I think it's important for people to understand what's happening with sort of global power and strength. It informs the investment world. As a CEO, it helps me think through, what's coming, both in our local markets, internationally. And so those are two great ones. It sounds like I should read something more fun, but those are.
I do need a third fun one in there. Somebody told me they're reading a kid's book that they liked.
Well, I do have 2 kids under 3, so I could tell you all about Dora the Explorer and Eric Carle books, but still try and read some for myself.
Okay. Now that sounds good. Well, Brigham Hyde, founder and CEO of Atropos Health, thank you very much for joining me today on the HealthBiz podcast.
Thanks, David.
You've been listening to the HealthBiz podcast with me, David Williams, president of Health Business Group. I conduct in-depth interviews with leaders in healthcare business and policy. If you like what you hear, go ahead and subscribe on your favorite service. While you're at it, go ahead and subscribe on your second and third favorite services as well. There's more good stuff to come, and you won't want to miss an episode. If your organization is seeking strategy consulting services in healthcare, check out our website, healthbusinessgroup.com.